My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. As a child, Matt Kahn dreamed of being an author someday. After an out-of-body experience at age 8 and several profound spiritual awakenings, Matt developed an otherworldly connection to his intuition that allowed him to become a profoundly powerful empathic healer. But then a back injury not only changed his path from personal trainer to healer, it also accelerated his abilities as he solidified his mission to become a spiritual teacher. Matt wrote the highly acclaimed books, Whatever Arises, Love That, Everything Is Here to Help You, and The Universe Always Has a Plan, which has been translated into more than a dozen languages. His website is mattkahn.org, and he joins me this week to share his amazing path and his Om Times Omi Award-winning book, All for Love, The Transformative Power of Holding Space. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Matt Kahn. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me. It's such an honor to be here.
Matt, please share with us your early life and how it contributed to the work and wisdom that you share with our world.
Well, from my earliest memory, I remember feeling confused about my emotions and my experiences with others, because I would start to become aware at a very young age. And of course, when you're aware at a young age, it takes many years to kind of become aware of what you're aware of. But I would notice that when my friends were feeling sad, I could feel the sadness inside my body. And more prominently, I wouldn't know how to separate my experiences from theirs. And so most commonly, when other people were sad, I thought they were mad at me, because I made everything about myself when I was a young kid, like we all do. And so I spent most of my earlier years, if I think back to my childhood, every time I was around someone that was sad, I wanted to cheer them up, or I wanted to help uplift their experience, of course, because I wanted them to experience happiness. But I misinterpreted their experience, which could have been from their family, could have been from an argument with the sibling, and I misperceived it as their opinion of me. So I thought that only when people were happy did they like me. And so I spent many, many years in my earlier development in a stage of what I call vibrational codependency, where I don't know where my emotions begin and theirs end, and I interpret everyone's experience about me. And these were the earlier experiences that helped me to really, over many, many years, discover that I'm what's called an empath. And for many of the listeners who are also empaths, in fact, I would say that everyone in the world is empath, just at various stages of awareness, realization, and consciousness. And so as I started to come into the truth of my empathic nature, that, for me, it wasn't a matter, and for many listeners, it may be the same way. It's not a matter of I choose to feel or not feel feelings. I'm in a space where I can't help but feel. And whether it's me feeling my own emotions or me feeling the emotions of the world being processed, I'm always in a state of feeling. And as I started to get to know this experience, which took many, many years and curiosity and a lot of big experiences, I started to realize that my emotions were like a psychic superpower. And that as I started to make peace with my feelings, and as I started to learn that it wasn't bad for me to be sensitive as a man, and that it's okay for me to feel, and that feeling emotions doesn't make me too much for people, or that I'm not going to lose people in my life by feeling too deeply, my emotions started to give me information and became this intuitive ability where through my feelings, I get such specific information. And then that helped me over, again, many, many years, to develop the ability to work with people as an intuitive healer, where I can use my emotional body as an imprint of their emotional body. So I can feel where people are at emotionally. I can tune into brain chemistry. And it helped me to be able to assist people in healing in a very compelling and radical way. And it's a beautiful full circle moment to know that what in the beginning of my life felt like I was being inundated by emotions, or I felt like I was plagued with an ability to only feel and to always be overwhelmed, what started as something that was very intense, I'm grateful has been developed into a skill set that I have been humbled and grateful to use to help so many people around the world. So it's truly a full circle moment if I think back all the way to when I was younger and how confused I was about my feelings, not realizing, of course, that my life was this journey that would help me hone these feelings as a tool to support so many in their healing journey.
Beautiful. I can share with you, and I must say that even though I came into this existence a few decades before you, I had the same sensations when I was growing up. So thank you for sharing that. It sort of reemphasizes for me that there are many of us who go through this process. And it's for those who have children who are reflecting those processes now, what would you say? What advice would you give them?
It's an interesting question because I've seen it on two different sides. I've seen parents who unintentionally shut down their children because an adult might come from the egoic mindset of, if someone has emotions that come up, they must have a problem that I need to fix. And if I can't fix it in 10 seconds or less, an adult can get frustrated and feel incapable and actually take that out on a child. And that develops this inner belief that we are too much for people. And of course, we become people pleasers because we want to be loved and accepted by people, not the most difficult one to deal with at all times. Then there's the other side of the coin, which is a parent might have had spiritual experiences and be very interested in spirituality. And the parent might think, if I could only teach my child what I wish I knew back then. And sometimes parents have a tendency to teach a child too much about spirituality when the child hasn't taken the time to really develop an ego before they're going to wake up out of it. So I think there's really two incredible extremes. And if we take the middle path, I think the best approach is always giving children outlets and options for how to express their feelings. First, of course, is to know that feeling is not wrong, and that what we learn through wisdom is that feelings always have a purpose, and we have to be wise enough to say, what does this feeling need? Is it telling me something? Does it want to be expressed? And then, of course, giving children opportunities and options to express their feelings. Like if I was talking to a child, I would say, does your anger or your sadness want to be danced out? Does it want to be colored out? Does it want to be depicted as art? Does it want to be screamed out or stomped out? Is it telling you a message that is important to listen to? So I think the middle path of all of this, as we prepare children for their evolutionary journeys, is not to give them too much spirituality unless they're asking very compelling questions, and not to, of course, shut down a child whose emotional process might last more than 10 to 30 seconds. But I think it's helping children learn that emotions are normal. They have messages for us. And as long as we have options as to how we can cope and harmonize with our emotions, it then becomes a part of a higher skill set instead of a source of insecurity that we might carry with us into other stages of development.
Thank you for that sage advice for the parents that are listening out there who have kids that are manifesting these abilities. So thank you.
Yes.
An out-of-body experience when you were 8 years old led to profound spiritual awakenings. Please describe the event and the understandings that ensued.
My goodness. When I was that age, it was during a time in the 1980s, during what was known as the Adam Walsh case, which was a child who was kidnapped. And it was during that time that as a kid, the big message was don't talk to strangers. And I remember being so afraid of being displaced from my parents or being kidnapped that I literally never left my parents' side when I was very, very young. And so I always felt safe being around my parents. And I say that because one night I went to sleep and I thought I was having a dream. And I found myself in this garden that was like a garden with colors that were of the highest hue and vibrance that I could describe or I've ever seen in my life. It was like HD multiplied by infinity. And the colors were so bright that as I looked at this garden with this incredible spectrum of brilliance, the brilliance of these colors were vibrating or emanating this feeling of love. And it felt to me immediately like a love beyond anything I'd known from my parents, which was surprising because that was, at that time of my age, my highest knowing of love. And I remember saying to myself in what I thought was a dream, I'm not afraid. I don't know where I am, but I'm safe. And that was such a big deal for me because I only knew safety as being, glued to my parents' hip. And so here I was in some location. I didn't know where I was. My parents were nowhere in sight, and I felt completely safe and whole in myself. These bright colors of the garden bringing forth this vibration of love. And I started to move through this garden and walk around. And I remember walking through a field of waist-high flowers. And from that young perspective, it was like the flowers were almost like to the height of my hips. So I was really having to move my legs through this field of waist-high flowers. And as I was moving through them, I also then realized I was simultaneously hovering above them, watching myself. So I could feel myself moving through the field of flowers, and I was floating above myself, watching it at the same time. I didn't know how I was having two different experiences at the same time, but the love was so intense, it really didn't matter. It was just kind of oh, well, this is happening. And in front of me, about 20 feet, was a being also floating above the flowers who had a white robe, a dark beard, and shoulder-length hair, dark hair. And he motioned me towards him, and I froze. And then I started to move towards him naturally. And as soon as I got about 5 feet from this being, it looked like their eyes were glowing pure white light. And at that age, when I was having that experience, for some reason, what I thought of, the association that came up, was thinking about like scary movies when people like roll their eyes up into their head. And as I had that thought about this experience, it almost like broke the state. And I fell through the garden, I fell through the sky, and then I fell back in my body. And only until I fell back in my body did I realize I left it. And as I'm in my body again, trying to process this, I'm freezing cold, I'm drenched in sweat, and I'm shaking. And out of the corner of my eye, in the doorway of my bedroom, I saw the same figure motioning me towards him, but he was kind of made out of this chalky white energy material. And as I looked directly at him, he disappeared. The next morning, I talked to my parents, who are very much into spirituality, and I told them about this experience. And my dad then goes on to tell me how he had nearly identical experience, 30 years before I did, when he was meditating in boot camp one day. And I didn't know what the significance was, but I knew that sharing such a vivid experience, and then my dad relaying nearly the same experience, there was some sort of connection. And it started to help me realize that things in life have connections to other bigger things. And of course, at that age, I didn't know what it was, but it was something I tucked in the back of my mind as you'll remember this. And then I remember going to my next door neighbor's house, who had a son my age, and I would, spend time with them. And in their living room, they had this framed picture of this person who was exactly the person I met in my out-of-body experience. And I said, "Who's that?" And they said, "Matt, that's Jesus. Everyone knows that's Jesus." And I was raised Jewish, so I didn't know he was. I said, "Well, that's the guy I met in my dream." And my friend laughed and said, "Matt, you didn't meet Jesus." And I said, "Well, I don't know who he is, but that's who I met." And from that experience, I started to have in my peripheral vision, I'd walk and see angels with me. And I didn't even know what an angel was, but I intuitively just knew it was an angel. And I would start to have these experiences of spontaneously knowing things without knowing how I know it. But it would just strike me as the most obvious truth of yeah, these are angels. And someone would say, what's an angel? I don't know. But I knew enough of just this is what it is. And this was the moment that started to really open me up psychically. And what's interesting is that it wasn't until my late 20s where those experiences started to expand even further. But that became the moment of activation. That was a initial experience that really started to move me in that direction.
It's interesting that you share that because there's a Buddhist concept called readiness in time, meaning we have to have a series of experiences before we're ready to embrace something that's new or something that's been there before, but that is now ready to come to its fulfillment in our lives. And I still had a similar experience in my childhood and then my mid to late 30s when my readiness in time evolved. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Please tell us how these events shaped your path as an empathic healer and spiritual teacher.
Think that from an early age, what's interesting about my path, because I think that I straddle I seem to straddle the line between one foot in the esoteric, and I have esoteric experiences every day, and one foot in the path of awakening or the path of dharma and wisdom. And sometimes spirituality, you have all dharma and no esoteric, and sometimes you have all esoteric and no dharma. And so what's interesting is my first life experience of spirituality that I just described gave me a very esoteric opening to there's something much bigger in life than what we see with our normal senses, something much bigger. But then I went off and developed an ego and went into middle school and discovered, social status and, all these things and achievement and seeking and all these things. And so I think that the order in which I've had experiences has helped me to really have a very unique view of the spiritual journey, where for me, it's not all esoteric and it's not all dharma. They're actually two sides of the same coin. They're two sides of the same reality. And I think what's interesting about that is that there are stages of our spiritual development that are going to be esoteric in nature. There are some that are going to be more dharmic in nature. And for me, my whole life journey has allowed me kind of to look at wisdom and healing as many, as many levels and many layers and many different frequencies. And so when I'm working with someone, what frequency does this require? Is this more of an esoteric in nature? Is this more of a dharmic in nature? And so I think for me, it's helped me to, even as a human being, integrate very big cosmic spiritual experiences and then ground it in very mature, meaningful action and embodiment. And I think that's really the direction humanity is going, so that it's not like we're going to one extreme side over here and then another extreme side, but really, how do we bring these two sides together? How do we bring big esoteric experiences and how do we ground it into the most mature and insightful and mindful decision-making that's going to really evolve our lives forward and allow us to support the expansion of all? And so I look back on my life and I look back at what seems like a lot of very different experiences. And I look back and I go, gosh, what a plan was created for me, and it unfolded perfectly. And it wasn't until, 30 some odd years into my life journey that I could turn back and look at things and go, wow, what a perfect plan was created. And I'm truly grateful to have taken this journey and to continue the journey. But what a perfect plan was created for sure.
I had the blessing of a wonderful spiritual teacher when I attended Interfaith Seminary in the mid-1990s. He would share that, and I quote, "Everything is unfolding in divine order, that we may not understand or like what is transpiring, but in retrospect and with spiritual eyes, we will see that there is a higher purpose." Do you resonate with that sentiment?
I absolutely do resonate with that sentence. I think that where the confusion comes from is that in people's egos, they think if things are not in divine order, then I have to take action to do something about it. Conversely, if everything is divine order, then there's nothing for me to do. And I think the middle ground, which I'm always promoting the middle way, is yes, everything's in divine order. Yes, everything is created as a catalyst that's going to expand consciousness. Yes, everything is making us better. Everything is evolving the world, but that's not without our participation. That's with our participation. So I like to look at the world as like a multidimensional training program. I often call the world the Angel Academy, where we incarnate, and no matter where we are incarnation cycle, we are here in like a school or a field trip, learning how to be spirit guides and angels in training. And we're doing that by the journeys we take as each incarnational version of ourselves. And so we look at the state of the world right now. Yes, what we're seeing in the world is divinely appointed, but it's also divinely appointed for all of us to play very specific roles so that we participate in experiencing the evolution of an entire species and planet, which is part of the training program for all the souls that we will guide in future incarnations as spirit guides and angels in training.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
You've gifted our world with a series of wonderful books, in many ways fulfilling your childhood aspiration of becoming an author. Let's discuss a couple of these, starting with Whatever Arises, Love That. What inspired that book, and what did you share with your readers?
When I started doing healing work, and I only know what I've learned from the universe and my direct conversations with my angels and ascended masters, and I started delivering messages to people, and I started to work with people in healing, and I didn't understand all the other spiritual paths. I learned them by doing intuitive sessions, and I would stand outside of myself. I'd listen to what they would say. I would listen to what I would intuitively say, and I would like mentally take notes. And over the years, I kind of figured out a lot of the other paths just by observation. And what I couldn't understand was that I always experienced the universe, source energy, whatever you want to call that, God, consciousness, the one, whatever you want to refer to source as. I knew that to be a source of infinite wisdom and infinite love. And there was nothing but infinite wisdom and love that made up source energy. And I would watch so many people on their spiritual path, whether it's healing, awakening, manifestation, whatever the goal was, attracting their soulmate. And they would go about these goals or go towards these experiences in ways that weren't always embodying the love that I experienced when tapping into source. And so my inspiration became, if we are all moving back into the living remembrance of source, and source is infinite wisdom and love, then perhaps the paths we take to reconnect with source must be equally as wise and loving. And I started to realize that a lot of the spiritual goals people had were trying to move away from their experiences, and their experiences and the symptoms were the parts of them begging for the love that they didn't receive in earlier years. So I started to realize that I think there needs to be a fundamental focus put on unconditional love and loving ourselves. And that if we're going to take a journey towards the remembrance of spirit, and spirit is infinite love, then every step of that journey back to spirit must be just as loving. And so it became my mission, my life purpose, to teach the world how every stage of spiritual development, awakening, healing, integration, manifestation, whatever it is, can be done and can only really occur when we are aligned with love. Kind of like if we were to go to school during the summer when no one was there, and then we think we should get credits when school wasn't in session. We don't really get credit for the work we do unless we are aligned with love. And so it became this really incredible download and realization that I started having. And again, it became this mission of, I'm going to be the person who reminds the world that every step forward must be taken in the most loving way. And how do we love ourselves versus just loving the ideas of ourselves or pretending or imagining understanding how powerful loving ourselves can be versus actually what it means to love ourselves. And this excited me in every fiber of my being. And it became something fresh and new that I began bringing to the spiritual communities and to this industry. And in the very beginning, it was like I was speaking a different language. And over time, this message of love and how it affects our nervous system and how it really is such a central part of our spiritual development is awakening in more and more beings. But this was the initial insight that led to the passion I have for the work I do and to do it only in the name of love.
My guest is Matt Kahn. We're going to be talking about his award-winning book, All for Love, The Transformative Power of Holding Space. Matt, please share with our listeners so they can get your books, your website, and find out more about you.
Sure. To learn more about my books, to check out my schedule of upcoming events, and to sign up for my free Sunday newsletter, and to get a free link to my free documentary, you can go to mattkahn.org. That's mattkahn.org.
And we'll be back with more of Matt after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio. Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Matt Kahn. We're going to be talking about his new book, All for Love. We're going to be talking about his best-selling book, All for Love, The Transformative Power of Holding Space. Matt, we had talked about your first book, Whatever Arises. Love that. Let's talk about one more before we discuss All for Love. You wrote a book called The Universe Always Has a Plan, The 10 Golden Rules of Letting Go, and you offer readers 10 golden rules to help unlock emotional freedom. What was the foundation of these rules? And please share one or two with our listeners.
The foundation of this book was that it has been known for many years and taught for lifetimes that everything happens for a reason. And I began to see how people would say that statement from a place of resignation. They would kind of say it in this half defeated, oh, everything happens for a reason. And then I began to be inspired by the idea of what if I could, in detail, explain the reasons why things happen. And it became an inspiration, and we also hear about the phrase of letting go. And what does that mean to let go? And what is, because letting go for many people is about pushing things away and is about avoiding and bypassing. So what does it really mean to surrender to the universe without being defeated by the universe? What does it mean that everything happens for a reason and actually we can know the reasons why things happen? And really, what are the prime insights that the universe is giving us to help us merge back into the remembrance of spirit and really live as embodiments of spirit? I mean, I'm saying a lot of things, but there's so much that inspires everything that I do. And I just wanted to bring 10 doses of wisdom from spirit. And I think if I think back to the first book, Whatever Rises Love That, it was always about how do we help the world realize we have to, if we're going to return to love, we have to take a loving path to do so. I think the next book was about, well, if the universe is infinitely wise, let's bring 10 golden rules of infinite wisdom to the awareness of awakening beings. And it's funny, I think back to the 10 golden rules. I think I can remember the first one. I think the first one is you've done nothing wrong. And that was the first chapter, you've done nothing wrong. And I think another one I remember is anyone who is angry is unhappy. And I when I think back to these golden rules, and I can't remember the other 8, but it helps people to have perspective. It helps people to understand and separate the difference between their experience and other people's experiences. It helps us to have the wisdom to be able to be true to our experience, not needing everyone to agree with our experience. And really, when we understand the infinite wisdom and love of the universe, we're all souls on a journey. We're all on different journeys. We're all learning things in different order. We're all at different semesters of the same curriculum. And so how do we coexist as spiritually evolved beings? How do we exist in a way where we live our lives, make decisions, not afraid of making risks, and without taking life out on ourselves? So when I wrote the second book, it was just a platform for me to be able to take all of the misunderstandings and all of the contradictions that I had seen throughout the spiritual journey as I started entering it. And I wanted to bring the world just a clear view of, here's a clear way to help you navigate your life forward. First book is how do you love yourself and how loving yourself is a cornerstone of your healing journey. And the second book was how do we start moving forward and how do we start navigating a life of wisdom by making wise choices and having respect for other people's experiences, even if they're not always respectful of our experiences. And so there was so much that goes into every book that I write. And it seems as if the world has really resonated with both for different reasons. And whenever I write a book, I always write it from the perspective of, I think about if this is the last book I'm ever going to write, if at the moment I'm done with this book, I literally leave this planet and this is what I leave behind for the world, what can I write that lets me feel like I am leaving the world everything that's within me? So every time I write a book, I come from that place. And when I wrote these 2 books, it's the place I came from.
Wonderful. Congratulations on your award-winning and best-selling latest book, All for Love, The Transformative Power of Holding Space. It won both the Om Times Omi Award for winner of World Vision Books and the Independent Publishers Book Awards Gold Medal for inspiration and spiritual books. So did you have that in mind when you wrote that book, that this might be the last book that you write?
I always do. I write every book from that place. Because that's how I get into that's my edge. The way I write is when it's time for me to write a book, okay, this is the last book I'm going to write. So I always play that game with myself. I always do. And when I wrote this book, it was during the time of the George Floyd incident. And when the world was experiencing a greater awareness of things like systemic racism and how are we going to move through all these differences and how are we going to really bring the world together and how are we going to bring the world together without needing every person to think and believe the same thing. Like what are we going to do here in this? We always hear in spirituality, right? The intention is manifesting heaven on earth, global peace for all. Well, how are we going to do this in a tangible way in a world of individuality? And what's the way, what's the thing the world really could benefit right now? And during that time in history, a few years ago, what I started to realize is that when I think back to the most compelling dialogues I've had with people over my 18-year career, whether in healing sessions or at retreats, the biggest conflicts people have are in communication. So I wanted to write a book of how does the world learn to communicate with themselves and others from a place of compassion? How do we speak to others from the awareness that I'm on a healing journey, everyone's on a healing journey, whether they're aware of it or not? And how do we learn to be true and authentic to ourselves in our communication? And how do we do it in a way that respects our healing journey and everyone's healing journey? And how do we actually learn how to communicate in a compassionate and authentic way, aware that we're all doing the best we can, we're all on a healing journey, and how do we move through this field of infinite perspective? How do we communicate in a way that manifests the love of spirit in every interaction? And that those kinds of questions or ideas were satisfied in this book I wrote, All for Love, The Transformative Power of Holding Space, where holding space is, I'm not just listening to people for content. I'm not just waiting for my chance to speak. That every interaction I have with a human being, I'm a part of their healing journey and they're a part of mine. And how can I begin to communicate from that space of awareness?
And that's like the ultimate basic golden rule that's found in an iteration in virtually every faith. Do unto others as you have them do unto you. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Really, if everyone did that, what a world we would have, wouldn't it?
Yes, indeed.
And the first attribute you shared is compassionate space holding. And you talk about levels of listening and dynamic listening. What are those?
So listening for most people is just when you're letting someone else speak and you're hearing them, but you're waiting for a space for them to stop for you to say the things that you want to share. Dynamic listening is when you are fully engaged in the act of listening, where we're hearing someone and taking the journey with them, that everything they're saying is important to the development of their evolutionary path. And that when we are dynamic listeners, we are listening to people as intently as when we're listening to our favorite song or watching a compelling movie or television show. That we're really with people, we're hearing every aspect of the plot line that they're describing, and we're taking the journey with them. And we're not just hearing them, we're not just letting people speak, we're asking follow-up questions. We're asking questions of interest. Oh, okay, when that happened, how did that make you feel? What was that like for you? What were you thinking when that happened? And what happens is when we really start to listen on a dynamic level, not just let people be heard, because that's kind of like letting someone talk and maybe taking a nap and waking up when it's your turn to speak. But when we really listen in a dynamic way, that's when people feel seen. That's when people feel heard. And that's when people feel safe to then open up and invite you to share from the same standpoint. Because a lot of us have this experience where we want to share and we listen to others, but other people don't take the same interest we take in them. But when we really listen from a dynamic level and we really see and hear people as extensions of ourselves, it's amazing how much more interested people become in us. And I think that when we start to think about communication as an exchange of consciousness, and I say this as someone who grew up walking around life when I was much younger, looking for someone who's interested in all the fantastic things I needed to share. And from that, I've grown into this being who is so interested and excited to listen to other people first, wanting other people to be seen and heard first, because my value is I want to live in a world where people feel safe within themselves. So what can I do to create safety for someone else? I allow them to be seen and heard. And so it's amazing what happens when we start to live from this place. When you start to see and hear someone from a dynamic space of listening, you actually feel seen and heard when you're truly seeing and hearing someone, because in the laws of unity consciousness, the way you engage another person is the way you feel engaged, even if their ego can't meet you there. So I began to discover in my younger years, when I really meet someone, I'm actually feeling met, and I'm feeling met more than if they were just engaging with me from their ego. So again, when we listen from a dynamic place, when we really take interest, when we become more selfless in taking a little bit more attention off of our agendas and put that much more attention on seeing and hearing someone else, it's amazing how seen and heard and worthy we feel just when hearing others from that deep standpoint.
Beautiful. The second attribute is validation and embraces encouragement. How may we encourage ourselves and one another?
You know, earlier we were talking about the quote, I think, from Rabbi Gelberman that you said about everything is of divine appointment. I think I'm paraphrasing that. And that everything is a divine occurrence. Everything is happening for a divine reason. And when we are encouraging ourselves or others, we are coming from that wisdom, because to encourage is to come from the place that everything is happening for a reason. This is supposed to be happening, because we can either encourage, which is to move with the current of reality, or we can doubt and question, which is to kind of turn, in the other direction. And again, there are times in life where questioning and doubting are, very fundamental, and we should always question and really find what's true for ourselves. But when we encourage other people's experiences, we're helping people remember that their experiences are not happening by accident. And instead of telling someone their experience is not happening by accident, we just come from that same wisdom and we encourage. And what happens is, and what I've discovered in my journey of helping so many people, and what I've discovered in my own personal life, is when I encourage someone from a place of support. And I've actually had this happen where I have given no spiritual insight to someone in my life and my family. It's kind of a rule in my life where when I'm not on stage doing the work that I do, if someone asks me a direct question, I'll answer it. But if you don't ask me a direct spiritual question in my personal life, I don't give spiritual wisdom, because there's no consent. So what I challenge myself to do is I give no wisdom unless it's asked of me, and I just support through encouragement. And I've had people who have had conversations with me who have said, thank you for all that wonderful advice you gave me. I gave them no advice. I just encouraged them. But what happens is that what we really need as human beings is to be encouraged so that we can learn to trust our instincts. We can realize everything's happening for a higher reason, and we can start participating in the flow of evolution and start returning to spirit. And we can do all of that, and we can help everyone move in that direction by just being an encouraging force that helps people to embrace their lives instead of turning away from their lives.
The third attribute is reverence. Reverence implies deep respect. How may we embody this?
Reverence for me is the recognition that everything is an extension of spirit. So reverence as a form of respect, reverence for me is universal respect, that I may not like the package life is come decorated in, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this is a manifestation of spirit. And if a manifestation of spirit has arrived at my doorstep, then there must be a higher reason for its existence. It must be here to balance me out. It must be here to help me transform one of my weaknesses into a greater strength. And so when we come from a place of reverence, we're respecting that. I may not like how things are packaged, and it certainly is never going to be an excuse to justify abusive behavior. but there's some reason why this is happening, and it's occurring for my participation and for my evolutionary benefit. And I think when we respect things from a place of reverence, we're able to see the invitation of what life is asking of us, and we're able to see it much clearer. And again, respecting everything as an expression of spirit doesn't mean we allow people to take advantage of us. It means if I'm in a position where I need to speak a truth, I need to change my life, and that might be difficult, can I also see that spirit has put me in this position to help me move through this difficulty and to make it more of a strength instead of something I'm afraid to face or avoid? So no matter what circumstance life, brings to us, can we respect it as an extension of divine will? Can we respect it as a manifestation of spirit? And again, never to justify being mistreated, can we say yes to allowing life to transform us for the better, to saying yes to doing things that aren't always convenient, but that they're always created to help take a weakness, turn it more into a strength, and move us along into the next level of our spiritual expansion.
The wisdom of my guest, Matt Kahn, will be back with more of Matt after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Matt, we talked about the first three attributes. The fourth attribute is mercy, perhaps the ultimate form of compassion. The fifth is worthiness, something that I personally had to struggle with for many years. And in this world of 24/7 spontaneous information where answers are being sought and demanded at light speed, the next one you share is patience. What are the attributes of patience, and how may we embody these in a seemingly impatient world?
When we think about patience, patience is really a matter of making peace with time. If we have a world that is run by such advanced technology, and technology can be very helpful in many ways, but I think technology, and when used unconsciously, is done to, with the positive intention of saving people time. But if you're always using technology to save yourself time, it's easy to forget that time is also a very important way in which we learn and surrender to spirit. And I think that when we live in a world of such fast-paced information gathering, the more information we gather and at such a fast rate, the more out of sync with time we become. And when we develop the attribute of patience, it's about being in sync with time. It's about being aligned with time. It's not about trying to fast forward through the world in our journey in a race against time. And that when we feel like we're running out of time, we're the most lost in the identification with our ego. When we are the most in harmony with time, experiencing synchronicities, aware of miracles, and experiencing, spontaneous manifestations of things. When we're in harmony with time, it shows us how integrated our egos are becoming. And so I think that patience is such an incredible attribute in the surrendering of our egos as our egos go through the rebirth to become the reborn soul of who we are in our awakening. Patience is not something we can fake. Patience is not something we can pretend, because time as a dimension simply is. And so patience is when we start to develop an interest in becoming in harmony with time. Instead of thinking we're losing time, we're running out of time. And again, it pulls us out of fight or flight. It helps us not to be ruled by the whims of our desires. And it helps us to develop an attraction to our own spirit and to move in the directions that are useful in the expansion of our spirit even if that means certain experiences will take more time instead of less. So I really think, in a nutshell, patience is what helps us come into harmony with time, which is a way in which we help to surrender the unconscious aspects of our ego and start to go further into the surrender that allows our spirit to truly awaken and shine at full capacity.
Of all the attributes you share in All for Love, I think the last three echo what humanity is calling for today. Let's start with gratitude.
Gratitude, being grateful for what is happening, makes what's happening not a circumstance or a mistake. Being grateful is the way of saying, not just I accept that this is happening by divine appointment, but gratitude says I will celebrate that divine appointment through this moment of thankfulness.
Bravery is the next one you write about. How may we embody this in a world that seems to demand it?
I think the bravery is not being afraid to make a mistake, not being afraid to move in a direction that isn't familiar. I think bravery is being willing to be present with life and allowing ourselves to know that we're going to learn from life, and we never know what the setup is. Meaning, I might think that if I do this, something's going to happen, and it might create the opposite to happen, and maybe that's the most meaningful thing that I need versus what I want. So bravery is a willingness to move in the direction that life is guiding us, the willingness to fully show up and be ourselves, to risk failing, to risk falling down, knowing that sometimes oftentimes we only fall down because of the meaningful journey of getting back up. And so bravery at its core is our ability to live at full capacity. And it begins by healing our fear of life, healing our fear of the divine, and most importantly, healing our fear of change. And so bravery is the acceptance that change is the only inevitability, and being willing to move in the direction of change so that I can overcome any fear of change as a way of stepping further into the light of my spirit.
And the last attribute in All for Love, the transformative power of holding space, is forgiveness. Is it possible to find and offer forgiveness for everything and anything? And does forgiveness, like charity, begin at home?
Well, everything can be forgiven, and forgiveness does arrive at everyone's doorstep. I think the confusing thing is that people try to use their egos to be the one who's forgiving. Like, I'm going to be the bigger person and forgive. And that's how I start to cope with feeling better about experiences, because I'm going to be the superior person. Or people really wrestle with, I can't forgive this experience, because if I forgive it, that means it's okay that it happened. And the way I teach forgiveness is that forgiveness is actually something that washes over you. Forgiveness is something that actually comes to you. It's not something that you, quote unquote, do with your ego. And when I experience forgiveness, and in the book, I talk about my experiences with my family, in particular, my mom. And when my mom was struggling at the end of her life, when I saw that the same pain that I endured from my mom was the same pain she carried from her journey and her father, when I saw that we were actually in the same pain from different experiences, just seeing that the pain that I felt from my mom was the same pain she carried and hid from, just seeing that created a spontaneous moment of forgiveness. So in the book, it's not necessarily about step 1 through 5 of how your ego can learn to be a forgiving ego. It's actually more of something that we hand over to the divine. And we say, I know I will forgive. Forgiveness will occur, and let it wash over me. Let it come to me by divine appointment. Let it be a miracle that I receive instead of something I'm trying to prove to myself. So I think really the beauty of how I write about forgiveness in the book is it makes it less of a tool or an agenda the ego tries to use, And it's really a spontaneous miracle that washes over us. All of us will forgive, but not because we learn to do it right. There's just a moment in every lifetime where we see the pain we carry from someone's behavior or some circumstance is the same pain that other people who may have hurt us are also in. And just starting to see that the pain we're in is the pain other people are in that moment where our pain may be from different circumstances, but our pain is universal. Somehow that shifts our awareness to being able to receive the beauty and the gift of forgiveness instead of trying to force our egos to be more forgiving. So I think, again, the beauty of it is allowing forgiveness to be a gift we receive from the divine and not something that we're trying to manipulate or get right in any way.
Beautiful. The wisdom of my guest, Matt Kahn. We've been talking about his book, All for Love, The Transformative Power of Holding Space. Matt, one more time, please share with our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and your amazing work.
Absolutely. To check out my upcoming event schedule, to check out books, and even to sign up for our free newsletter, please go to mattkahn.org. That's mattkahn.org. And when you sign up for the newsletter, we send you a link to our documentary that we're so excited to share with the world.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your amazing wisdom and all of these wonderful words that you've shared with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Herman. Have a wonderful week.